So the thing about the use of Abyss in this event is, A, it kind of has the same problems as before, which is, being ganked, but also B, this event is designed to be done with like super cheap equipment for the most part. So it's not like somebody that you'd want to grab and kill anyways for the most part. But more importantly, this event is designed for new bros. Like, the hacking sites make sense because of well, first of all, like, yes, there are people that hunt relic sites, but making relic sites that can be accessed in an instanced way for 3 weeks, I don't think is the worst thing ever. Do I think that it should be a permanent thing? Probably not. If it is, I think that one of the explorations here is that the NPE should be more instanced. I think that that's the real answer, right? That we should, or rather CCP should take more control over the NPE, and like they have with the air stuff, but have the future, like the stuff that follows after the basic NPE. Basically, you could have tutorials that are effectively filaments. Actually, as a matter of fact, there is an event going on Serenity right now, which is a roguelike adventure, which a lot of people are praising that they got that and we got Doctor Who, but like, it's instanced, right? Like, worse than instanced. You literally pull up the interface and you push a button while you're docked, and then you appear in the site. So inconsistency boggles me, but you could use filaments or that concept of like a button that you hit to bring you to an instanced system that allows you to practice very specific mechanics, make the instance a puzzle such that, they have 20 minutes to succeed at this basic puzzle. And if they fail, they blow up. That's fun. That could potentially be fun. Put some pressure there. Especially if it's like, so imagine if rather than like the scanning and hacking, but introducing both of those concepts at the same time is actually pretty confusing to a lot of new players, I find. So separating those two such that you scan and then you go to the scan site and pick up the filament and then bring it back. And then in the next event, use it to go hack sites. That actually could be potentially pretty awesome, especially. But my point is that create a scenario where the people understand that you need to, there are these 3 cans. You need to successfully hack all 3 of these cans to unlock the gate. You've got 20 minutes. They're just blue cans. They don't explode. Nymphentamy? I have no idea which one. Thank you for joining us down the rabbit hole, Jeep Online. I think that could potentially be good, but adding and I push back on the idea that instance PvE is safe. In fact, instance PvE is instanced such that then the PvE itself can be demanding. That's the whole point of this, right? The reason why you make PvE instanced is because if it's not instanced, then the player is always expected to keep their eye out for players, which is a draw on their attention, right? So they can only make sites that are so complicated because they have to allow the player enough focus to be able to also keep track of, descan and local and all that sort of stuff. By bringing them into an abyssal filament, you're able to say, okay, we are now going to command your full attention for the next, 10 to 20 minutes. And once again, you still have the PvP opportunity because somebody could just be waiting for you on the way out, but it allows the PvE to truly demand attention and require good piloting or good, learning the rules. So instance PvE ends up being extremely valuable to EVE Online for that purpose. So just like with the Doctor Who event, those T3 and T4 sites are not easy. They're heavily restricted what ships you're allowed to bring. They are very dangerous, especially the T4 sites. So it encourages people to work together. Like, there's enough involved in the T3 and T4 sites that you honestly don't need the additional distraction of having to defend yourself against, or potentially defending yourself against players. That said, CCP has also suggested, or in the interview, they talked about how what they want to do is, what they're going to be doing is introducing a whole bunch of new anomalies, or at least sites and stuff like that. He cited the new sites that got released, the Capital Shipyard and the road drone sites and all that stuff. But he does point out those sites are scanned, and they actually said that these are going to be closer to the normal sites. And he said that it's classic sites with a twist. And he says that it's not going to replace the old sites, but it's going to add new layer of difficulty and escalation. He said that what they want to do is make it so that nullsec anoms are much harder, but much, much more rewarding. So what I'm hearing from that is they're going to have, they're going to move it more towards anomalies escalating, and having those escalations be the place where they put in the advanced AI, where they put in the different dangers, when they put in the more complex tasks and with the better rewards. So you would rat, and rather than escalating to like a 10 of 10, it'll escalate to one of these new sites, and more frequently, potentially, or whatever. Or drop filaments. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. Let's see. Was there any other notes that they put on about this? Not that I can see. All right, we'll get to some of this stuff later. So then in the scarcity stuff, they do talk about how people are angry because they comment about the fact that it's very specific communities, very specific groups of people that are angry about the changes, including rogue pilots, which is something that we knew. And we'll talk about this more when we look at the MER, but the reduction of rogue wall mining in the game is pretty impactful to the overall economy. And it's worth noting that CCP Rattai suggested that it is healthy now. Now, healthy could have some give to it, but it sounds like this level of resource availability is pretty much where we're looking at. And it's worth noting that, like, as I've said before, the end of scarcity was not about the fact that everybody can just mine as much as they used to. It's about, during scarcity, it didn't matter if you wanted to mine. It was hard to even find resources, right? Like, they were just taken out. You can't mine the rock quickly if there isn't a rock there, And so what the prosperity patch did was it made it so it's like, okay, well, now there's enough stuff out there. It's up to you to actually get it. It's now a manpower issue. Which hopefully is a much better way, because also it's something that we could grow into, right? It just means that we're not actually meeting our full potential yet, which is good. He also really, really emphasized, and as I agree with, that like the one thing that we can't do is go back to the way it was, because it was out of control. Some of this was discussed at 1 hour and 12 minutes. This is when he starts talking about it, scarcity versus prosperity. The thing that I noted he talked about was that CCP, he said that designers were writing internal memos citing their concerns over the state of the game back then. And that he, in fact, was one of those guys. And he wrote what he called a manifesto of what he saw was wrong and what needed to be changed. And he didn't say it outright, but it sounds like that could have very well been why he was chosen. Like, his idea, his plan was deemed as good, and therefore, he was put into that position and working towards executing it. But I found it interesting that they were talking about the fact that this was a huge issue of angst within the company prior to all of this happening. And it likens back to something I've talked about before, which is that CCP Rise was talking to me about stuff back in, I guess it was 2019, because it was around the time of the Abyss. And he was lamenting about the fact that when they put in new content, they want to put in new rewards, but the issue is that there's already so much in the game that they can't put in any new rewards, that they would actually have to like remove something in order to put something else in. The faucets were on too high. And so, or already were maxed out as they considered it. And so, yeah, there absolutely was tremors to this being a huge problem for the years leading up to Scarcity. It must have been 2018. Leading up to Scarcity and why it happened. So, but the painful part's over, and now we can get used to a new norm, and that's cool. And it sounds to me like the biggest advantage that we're going to get from here on out is utility / quality of life. Things like the compression, which they said they're going to tweak those numbers to make it more not terrible, not take hours to do, but also make it so that it's not click intensive. But by and large, it's going to be released as it was originally described. So get used to that. They also, re-emphasize the fact that battleships will become more powerful. This note says become more like dreadnoughts. I didn't really get that. What I heard was that they talked about Munins and hacks and all that stuff. They referred to the Marauder as an aspirational ship. He said that the Marauder is a good aspirational ship for a new player to get to like work towards, and that it is designed to be the step between normal battleship and dreadnought. I don't remember him specifically saying that they were going to like comparing the T1 battleships to that, but they are going to buff the battleships. And as I've said before, there's plenty of headroom for the battleships to grow, and maybe free up some room in the subcapital world to breathe a little bit. Is CCP Rise still at CCP? Yeah, he's the head of Team Talos, which is still in operation. So, and then also later on, they talk about hacks and the meta and all that kind of stuff. And they talked about the fact that they nerfed the hacks by removing the micro warp drive, but that the Munin is still doing quite well. And all of them agreed and, was well noted that a lot of this actually has less to do with the hack and more to do with the power of artillery and freedom of maneuverability in the kind of combat that becomes highly relevant in Eve. So that it isn't necessarily even about nerfing the Munin because of two problems. One, you're not actually fixing the fundamental problem, because you see it in other places too. And like they mentioned the Vargur. But they noted that like they have to be really careful when they nerf hacks. And he didn't say this outright, but it reminded me of the idea that like the question that must be asked is, what is this ship a predator to? Or more importantly, what in the meta is the Munin keeping in check? Right? And to that, we probably don't really fully understand or know. Right? If the Munin went away, what is the Munin the hard counter for that without the Munin would get out of control? So this I liken it to this story. Yellowstone National Park. In the 1930s, Yellowstone National Park made the decision, they had a problem with wolves. There were too many wolves. It was risky to people, and they wanted to make this national park like a place that people would go. So they killed all the wolves. Wolves are predators. We don't need predators. But here's the problem with that. The wolves were keeping the elk in check. Without a predator like wolves, now bears and other things like that were there, but the wolves were far more efficient at getting the elk. So without the wolves, the elk start growing out of control. Well, the elk eat a lot of things. They trample the ground, and more importantly, they eat the bark off of the trees, killing them, the oak trees and stuff. And so removing the wolves actually destabilized the ecosystem of Yellowstone National Park, to the point where in 2019, or sorry, in 1990 rather, they reintroduced the wolves in order to restabilize the ecosystem. So this is a consideration that CCP has that I don't think the player base always necessarily respects. But this is one of the reasons why PvP balance is always a lot slower than PvE balance, because you never know what secondary effects that's going to have on the meta. Another good example was when I've mentioned this before, but when Paladin in Hearthstone's, they actually nerfed a Paladin deck because it was out of control. But what emerged from that was actually a stronger, even cheesier Paladin deck. So, you know, it's not always so straightforward. All right. Next, they did talk about the Doctor Who event, but that was a lot of that stuff was talked about on my stream with CCP Swift and CCP Fozzie, so you can go check that out or listen to this for that information. I will note that, like, I think it's funny that CCP Swift has become like the official babysitter of devs. You know, devs are going on streams and stuff, but it's always like the dev in question and CCP Swift. But he's actually done a really good job. Like, you know, he's a great interviewer. He's a really good way, you know, he strikes a really good balance of being a CCP, CCP employee that seems pretty close to being on the player side of the fence, more on the player side of the fence than a lot of other people, including previous community managers. You know, he really does come across as just a nerdy fanboy of EVE Online that happens to have been hired by them. And I think that that's really, really effective as a person to moderate these kinds of interviews, and not moderate as in like provide moderation, but I mean like provide a moderating voice to the matter. Any rate, dynamic distribution, they confirmed that this is not what we have right now, but the idea was that in the same way that the bounty system has been changed such that if you rat too much in one place, it goes down, and, you know, in this case, combat encourages it to go back up. They like that model. I know that that's been kind of controversial within the player base, but CCP is actually really favorable of that model. And obviously the player base is unhappy about it because it doesn't like give them anything valuable, but it's just a challenge for them to face. It's one of those things that's not necessarily meant to be feel good. It's meant to be a thing that you have to deal with and overcome, and that's the whole point. Sure thing. Thank you for joining us down the rabbit hole, which is online. So, but so they want things like ore and stuff to be the same way. And this is very close to what I was talking about before, which is that I think that the null security space is actually reversed. I think that as structures become, or as a nullsec empire grows and the city gets bigger, ADMs go up, more structures get put down, I think that industry bonuses should probably be increased, but availability of resources and the pirates should be decreased, right? That you have to leave the safety of the system of your home systems in order to get the good stuff. That was something I suggested before. This sounds like it would probably naturally do that, where, you know, if you just stick in one place and make it your fortress and just mine the shit out of it, you'll end up to the point where there's nothing, or at least a lot less to mine, which is pretty interesting. Won't we just kill alts to manipulate dynamic resources? Well, that's a cost benefit analysis, right? Because you can't just use free equipment. You have to use actual stuff from my understanding in order to get the ADM up. I mean, there's a reason why people aren't doing that right now as much. Is it happening? I don't think it's happening. But yeah, combine that with what they were saying about the new sites. I could definitely see where you would like rat your anoms, and then that would lead you to go out of that area of your safe zones in order to go do the cooler sites. I think that has a really interesting possibility. And this also may tie into the fact that the Roke Wall now, they've been experimenting with the Roke Wall having their own jump bridge, or the ability to jump portal with people, such that like if there is better mining outside of your home, you would jump out to it, perform the mining, and then jump home. Not sure. That sounds honestly a little bit crazy, but who knows? If that ends up being the best way to do things, then that's what people will do. The other thing that I found was really interesting was around the 1 hour 25 minute mark, he started talking about like what he's unhappy with and what is coming up next. Let me just double check I'm not missing anything. I'm not. Okay, so first and foremost, he cited filaments, and specifically filaments' interactions with wormholes as being something that he is unhappy with, specifically when it comes to the moving of things around in the game, right? It's too easy to get out of wormholes, and things are easy to move around in space right now because of these filaments. So I would expect that the situation when it comes to poachfin filaments to be changed in some way sooner rather than later, and not for the more versatile. I'll put it that way. It is also worth noting that CCP actually sees poachfin as being a success. Their goal was to create a new environment to fight over with with unique conditions, and that has increasingly been successful. They removed the gates standings to make it so that people would actually be able to move freely in there and fight, and that is actually happening. So that's good. It would still be nice if the sites are still totally borked in my opinion, but poachfin as a region of space is doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is good to know. He also, going back to the nullsec thing, they referred to IHUB customization. Now, I've talked about this before, and I suggested that this could involve like weather, applying different, you could choose status effects that affect everybody within that system. That said, what he suggested was closer to what some other people have suggested, which is that you're able to customize slightly or what is available within your space. So, for instance, his exact example was like, if there's a resource that used to be applicable, receivable in nullsec, but isn't there anymore, would it be worth it to you to bring it back? And I think that that's a big deal because it would have an impact on the economy, but more importantly, B, the devil's in the details here, right? The question is, how much resources would that make it available? And more importantly, what is the cost? So they're wanting to change the way that IHUBs work. So the way I see is that chances are the whole ADM system is going to get a rework, right? Because, the missions are like, bounties and resource availability will deplete automatically, making you want to go, try out new areas in order to get better resources. And now with your IHUBs, you can implement new, rather than putting in just like a pirate one and upgrading it to 5, so that way you get pirate stuff. You're never getting the Arja back. I worked too hard. But instead, what you get is the ability to add certain customization to the system. So you can make it so that the system literally creates the resources of a high-sec system. So there's no more null-sec ore in that system, but it does spawn high-sec belts, or low-sec belts. That sounds closer to be what he was talking about. Could be a combination of the two. But yeah, the question is, what will it make available, and what will be the cost of making that available, and how does this impact the whole IHUB ADM system as a whole? He did cite that this was a big priority for them. However, one of the things I found very interesting and unexpected was that he said that they've shifted such that their current highest priority is structure rebalance. And the things he said there, I would recommend listening into it yourself. It starts at 1 hour and 31 minutes. He said that they're prioritizing the structures thing over IHUBs. But while he did point out things like faction warfare space and structures impact onto those and how he's unhappy with that, which is kind of what we already knew. One of the things he did was he tied it to that concept of like the IHUBs and customizations and stuff, and specifically said that the changes in structures is going to be designed to make the fights that we have been seeing over them more interesting. So does structure rebalance mean fewer spam in space? I'm actually of the opinion that structure spam is not bad because, like I said, cities have buildings. But he has cited the fact that he's not really happy with it. But the point is that this could be a very deep and fundamental rework of how structures work. And he also said that this isn't something that will be right away. It'll be an ongoing project in order to get structures up to par. I imagine that we will see the first sets of that very, very soon, and start to get an idea of where they're going with Upwell 3.0, basically. What's interesting is that also it sounded to me, by the way that he described it, I just realized this now, it sounded to me like this change in priority was relatively recent. Like, I don't know how recent, but it really did sound to me like this change had happened since the dev blog, right? The dev blog that cited what they were going to do before FanFest. The structures one was just one of the things, along with the iHub and the other one. This sounds like they have actually changed their priorities since then. Udu Simbala, thank you for joining us down the rabbit hole with Achieve Online. So my tinfoil for this now is, because he specifically focused more on the change in structures and its impact on null security space and warfare. So it makes me wonder, thank you, Zero. It makes me wonder whether or not the recent events involving structures was not a factor to it. Is this a very recent change? Because he was even talking about, this is what we're going to be talking about today, right? Like, in his meetings. So I wonder if the fact that the abandoned structure was taken the way that it was the deciding factor that pushed the structure rebalance from priority 2 to priority 1. I wonder. Maybe I'll get, that might be a question that I can ask CCP Rattai. Or if you're listening, you can always comment in the comments down below on YouTube or on Twitter @mebro. It's not. I like my tinfoil. Leave me alone. No, but something obviously happened and they reprioritized it. He did say that it was a change. So I do find that very interesting. Surgical Strike was mentioned in relationship to capitals. He actually said that Surgical Strike was successful as part of their attempt to reign in capitals, which I found very interesting. I didn't remember very much of a comment that specifically said, oh, well, we've only had a problem in JSpace, but I might have missed it. I strongly disagree. CCP Rattai, since you're already listening, because you're answering my previous question, I don't agree with this, man. I do not agree that JSpace was the only thing negative impacted by this. The Abyss, invasions, incursions, any high-level PvE has all been impacted by this too. I'll bet that tethering, timers, and asset safeties are all on the table. Absolutely. Yep. I would say all of those, plus the weapon systems, plus the damage caps and the way that damage is done. Like, all of those things are on the table. It made them faster clears? What are you talking about? What? Hold up. Surgical Strike did not make Abyss faster. It made it significantly more dead. It wasn't like the rats lost resist. Only us. Either way. So yeah, let's see if there's anything else. Isn't Trig Space basically Wormhole's shielded region with its own rules? Yeah, I call it Super Thera. It's 27 wormhole systems that are connected by Triglavian stargates with special amenities that require Triglavian standings to use. That is what Pochvin is, with special elements that lead into and out. So you think that Surgical Strike was good for the Abyss, Fonsui? That's an interesting note. I think if anybody had an opinion about Surgical Strike in the Abyss, it would be Fonsui. So I may defer to that opinion, or have you jump on maybe later and talk about it. Yeah, they also, like I said, they cited what makes the Abyss good. But I do feel like these notes kind of underplay it. What was Surgical Strike? Surgical Strike was an update a year ago? 2 years ago now? I don't remember. I think it was a year ago, in which basically all of the resistance modules were nerfed slightly, and all of the close range ammo was buffed. Only close range ammo. Okay, so you're saying that Surgical Strike both made the Abyss more challenging, but also the ammo change made it so that more ships were viable. So it actually broadened a little bit of the, rather than tall, where there's like Gila and Sacrilege and maybe a few others, it kind of brought it down a little bit. That's kind of cool. I like that. All right. The only thing I was concerned about that with the Abyss was short range ammo and its relationship to the battle cruisers, but obviously not that big of an issue. So the thing is about this is what I say before, which is that what frustrates me about the Abyss is that the very people that shit on the Abyss for being instanced are the very people that should be running the Abyss. Right? Like, if you're complaining that PvE is boring and you want to make PvE, you want to make ISK good for your PvE, you should run the Abyss. For two reasons. One, it, as it has been pointed out, is a lot of money if you're at the top levels. But more importantly, number two, in order to be at the top level, you need good equipment and good knowledge, which means the Abyss not only rewards higher SP, but rewards those who have conquered it. And it teaches you how to fly better. So yes, as I've said many, many times, you can do it brain dead if you want to, but even brain dead stuff isn't as brain dead necessarily as you think it is. But in the end, if you want to push it, you're probably going to end up wanting to go with something that allows you to monetize your expertise, right? If you're such a fucking good pilot, then you shouldn't need to run level 4 missions. You shouldn't need to run Sanctums. You should be able to run the Abyss. In fact, you should be able to run the Abyss in a relatively cheap ship, not a 4 billion Iskila. You should be able to run T4s, T5s in, 100 million, billion and a half Isk ship. If you're good, you can. So, I think that this is one of my big frustrations is that people reject the Abyss without at least accepting or embracing the parts of it, like its advantages. And the reason why this is frustrating is because then they turn around and then complain that those advantages don't exist, right? And this goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is that instance PvE allows CCP to demand your full attention. So if more skilled pilots adopted the Abyss as their de facto way of earning ISK, and more players introduced other players, newer players, to PvE or to flying in Eve via the Abyss, like we do, I think that would make the Abyss more popular and would encourage CCP to iterate on it more, which would make it get more love and more success. I feel like our refusal to accept instance PvE or reject it out of hand is starting to get in the way of it being as good as it can be, because the previous iteration of the Abyss was very ham-handed compared to the original. We need CCP to see that first of all, we need to be able to respect the Abyss's PvE and what its value is, like, broadly. And CCP needs to work on continually making it better, not just a very rough-handed iteration once every couple of years. You know, they only have 5 weathers. They talked about potentially introducing new weathers. There could be, just like events, right? Why is there, if there's an abyssal PvP site for every event, why isn't there an abyssal combat site for every event? Now, obviously there is an abyssal combat site in this event, but like, shouldn't there be a special filament that is available only during the winter event that allows you to run the Abyss with the winter weather effects in place? That could be cool, right? There's so much potential in the Abyss, but it's difficult to argue to CCP that they should do it if the player base is rejecting it out of hand. Because at that point, why no improvement will make it work, because they are not even assessing it based on its real value. And the solutions that people present, things like suspect flags and stuff like that, are just awful solutions that are basically designed to just make people no longer run those tiers. I would much more rather those tiers be seen as a challenge and be used as a challenge. As a way of improving our PvE, such that running the PvE itself, like, what frustrates me, this is true about the Doctor Who event too, is that since everything is being seen as a means to the end, like, people are saying that the grind for the Doctor Who sites is too much. But if hacking is what you want to do, or if you're a new player looking around for stuff, like, the fact that you get to do a lot of it isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? So allowing people to have content that engages them while getting them increasingly familiar with the controls, mechanics, and experience of EVE Online is how we retain people past the first 30 minutes. We don't retain people because there is a nullsec empire that they could join. Some people join that, but not that many. People that join a game want to be able to play with the mechanics of the game in order to learn some things. And we don't do that. Hell, even this event doesn't even really do this. This is why I said that the curious filaments are too hard to make, because, as you know, anybody knows, when it comes to marketing and stuff like that, you know, one of the evil things that game developers have figured out in the free-to-play world is that you make your initial progress painfully easy. You want them to make it the first few steps without any problems whatsoever, such that then they are invested and want to take step 3, 4, and 5. So CCP should take that philosophy to heart and make it so that it is very obvious and well rewarding to try out and get into different things, and then once they're hooked, then the practical applications of it are introduced. But PvE and EVE Online does not have to be evaluated as simply a means to get ISK. People play this game for the PvE. People enjoy doing the PvE. And that is considering the fact that the PvE is over 10 years old and awful for the most part. So how many people would stick with EVE Online if it had a good PvE? More importantly, do you really think that those players are going to stay in the PvE forever? No. If they get money and they learn to pilot, they're going to be the ones that go out there and take the next step and fight and fly and all that sort of stuff. That's what they mean by sometimes they do fly other things in ships in space. It's that's like arguing that people that rat never fight never drop in fights, right? It's not true. The same player does both activities. So allowing players to have a PvE that is engaging and demanding and at least allows you to practice your basic fundamentals, as I always call it, your drills, and having that be a good fundamental way of like people making ISK, and expand on it a little bit in order to, make sure to test different things and all that stuff, then I think that you end up with more and higher quality pilots in the end, period. And they don't just stay with the PvE, they move on. The idea that people have to start out with PvP or nothing is incredibly gatekeeping. Let me put it to you a different way. Why is it that we are perfectly okay with telling people that the way you learn EVE is to get 20 Punishers and fly them into low sec until you get them all blown up? And yet, we refuse to accept that we're supposed to learn the Abyss using cheap ships and losing them. Why do we recommend... Yep, I can link it. Why do we recommend... why do we recommend sacrificing a bunch of Punishers to learn PvP, but we don't recommend sacrificing a bunch of Punishers to learn the ins and outs of the Abyss? I find that interesting, and I really wish that we could get around that somehow. I continually kind of go back to the idea that we need challenges that provide you the equipment, right? That if you if you take on the challenge, they actually give you the thing, the ship, and you get put on the challenge, and if you succeed, you get to keep the ship. No one is against people using the Abyss or PvE to learn to fly. You're wrong. That's all I'm going to say. You are demonstrably wrong. There's a lot of people that are against that fact. Now, they say it's very low risk, but again, so that assumes that the PvE is difficult. I'm not going to do that right. Sure. I guess my point is that for the most part, what people do is deny that the Abyss allows you to learn to fly. That people still lump the Abyss in with other forms of PvE as being not useful to the learning of PvP. That, that it's often stressed that if you run the Abyss 1,000 times and then go do PvP, you'll still get your ass kicked. And I often have to point out that that's fine. It's okay for PvP to be a step beyond it, but it's a step in between, right? It gets the person to make it so that when they get out there to do their PvP, they understand the fundamentals of what's happening. So that's more of the argument that I get into with people, is that they deny its value as a tool to learn piloting. Unfortunately, I don't have like evidence on hand, first of all, because I didn't prepare it, but also because this comes from a lot of conversations on things like TIS, Discord, and other places like this. So it's like, you know, I'm just debating with somebody. But yeah, I do hear all the time that Abyss is low risk. And the thing is that like the Abyss is either, you know, better than anomaly ratting levels or low risk. It's not both, right? If you do low tier abyssals, then it's pretty much no risk. If you do high tier abyssals, then it's worth a lot of risk. But high tier abyssals are not no risk by any stretch of the imagination. Now, the other thing, though, to take it back the other way, the one question that I'd like to follow up with, and again, since, you know, CCP Rattai is still watching and diligently taking notes and fulfilling all of my requests, the challenge to this statement is, and I don't know if Fonsui's actually done the research yet. I know I haven't, but there's concern that with the removal of anchorable things in JITA, you can now effectively become immune and jump back in. That being said, I don't know if that's confirmed or is just us all saying that. But I think that CCP needs to acknowledge that this is violated if it is possible to be done in JITA. I still stand by the fact that I would actually restrict it to everything 0.5 and below. That is actually the restriction I would go with. The bare minimum would be restricting it out of JITA. Or all of the trade, well, all three of the trade hubs, JITA, MR, and DoDixie. The ones that have restriction on anchoring. Yeah, exactly. The problem is that being able to run the Abyss safely in JITA, it makes those people who say that it is totally safe way more correct than they should be. Have I seen the new event on Serenity? I have, and I briefly touched on it. I think it's hilarious, the people that are pro the roguelike on Serenity but anti abyssal filaments. Because, I mean, in a lot of ways, they're very close. I mean, like, abyssal filaments are sort of a roguelite. I mean, permadeath and all that stuff. It isn't quite the same because you don't, like, build a build as you go. That's closer to the hacking minigame, which the hacking minigame, when they made it, they cited roguelikes as being what they were attempting to create, right? What do you think is the percentage of player base that scrutinizes? Hold on, that scrolled past. All things Eve, like you guys, less than 10%. That's part of the problem, is that ultimately all of these media, all Eve media, is effectively an echo chamber. Because it's a pretty big requirement to step into this realm and even to start listening. So, you know, that's why things like metrics become so important. And it's honestly why I try to always give even a controversial opinion, because I feel like we need a more textured discussion, because I think that there are a lot of voices that are unheard. And this problem is magnified by the fact that because of the open PvP nature of Eve, it encourages loud or, you know, aggressive, hostile, powerful players to be loud, and players that would rather not be bothered as they try to do stuff to be quiet. So it makes it so that PvEers, high-seckers, industrialists have a notably smaller voice in the game, in the Eve meta community, then they have impact on the actual game itself. They are disproportionately unvoiced. I don't know. What pays for more PvP in Eve, CCs or crabbing? What's a CC? deplatform all PvPers. No, I mean, but like if you look at it, if you look at how the EVE media landscape and what was this, known as being true within the EVE community prior to the war deck changes and now, I think that you hear a lot more voices and a lot more different kind of voices now that the war deck changes have happened, and so people can voice themselves without being aggressively targeted. Oh, credit card. Well, so I mean, and this is true about most video games, almost any video game that has a premium currency that can be, a currency that can be purchased in game via real life money in some way or another, is that it's always going to be more efficient to get a job and work the job and then use that to buy Plex and do the stuff. But the whole point is that, you're playing the game, presumably because you like playing the game. So, and you don't like flipping burgers. So I would rather take less value and be doing the thing I was wanting to do with that value anyways, i.e. play EVE, as opposed to doing something that I find miserable just so that I can have more efficient time versus investment in EVE Online. That's ridiculous. You love to flip burger? I actually, I've never done it, so I could find my calling. Who knows? And you assume that all players are like me and play only one game. You assume first of all, you assume that I only play one game. I mean, you can play it casually and like, I know people that play it relatively casually and still earn pretty good ISK and have a good time in the world, especially once they've developed some sort of niche. There are plenty of niches that are compatible with a otherwise busy schedule. Yeah, I'm cheating on EVE with tiny moon bunnies. Actually, I try to stream other games all the time, but most of the people come from my EVE streams. But like, big fan of Hollow Knight. Have you learned more in the last years about why the Trig hate hive linking when they themselves are Triokas? Well, we don't really know what the nature of Trioka is. But in the HFN 5, I think it was, data stream, they do a comparison with, as they're trying to evaluate what to do about the Sancha, they do a query against a historical record of a satellite polity that was Jovian and Triglavian in nature. So, I kind of, that kind of implies it might be the sleeper civilization. But either way, it says that in the end, they had to destroy everything that was touching it and preserve integrity and, other things like that. So you could tell that there was some sort of falling out that happened, and they were looking at that for instructions about how to deal with the Sancha. So I can only assume that event is related to the Shrouded Days, or, somehow, the conflict between them and the Sleepers, because that's what they see as hive linking, right? The Sleepers hive link. I think that's the biggest reason why they are against hive linking. It's because they fought with the Sleepers in the early days. So they have a policy against it. I can have a second job and it won't pay for all the games I play. I mean, that sounds to me like you're getting a lot of value out of your games. Now, there are a lot of predatory free-to-play policies. Again, Just Strife Hayes has a lot of good videos on this. And some of them are implemented to some degree in EVE Online. But EVE is pretty resistant to a lot of things because of the permadeath nature of things. Not completely. It's worth keeping an eye on. Yeah, the nerds complaining that they PvP can't PvP because they're space poor. Curious to the ration of main content PvPers ISK versus using credit cards. I'm interested in that, but I'm also interested in so this goes back to the people complaining about wanting something, but then rejecting the solution, right? I find very often that the people who are complaining about the cost of PvP are not running around in T1 cruisers. They're running around in dreads, carriers, and supers. And yeah, if you are at that end of the diminishing return power levels or whatever, then yeah, it's going to be expensive. But if you want to affordably fight and have fun with it, then faction warfare exists. So you cannot both complain about expensive PvP and, again, reject faction warfare out of hand with consistency. And this idea that, like, somehow flying in a carrier or a dreadnought or even a battleship is somehow more fun than a T1 cruiser, I just don't know if I can buy that. The actual act of flying is just as fun. In fact, it's probably more fun in a smaller, more agile ship. Sure, your numbers aren't bigger, but like, is that really what motivates you? Like, is that really is the difference between having fun and not having fun? Is the number 100 something shows up versus 1,000 something shows up? Is that literally it? You're sacrificing everything else to have big numbers. That is, like, we need to get back to capitals being seen as a tool to be used under, for a purpose, not as a step up that must be performed at some point. I hope that the battleship issue is going to fix some of that. But again, like I said, for those people who want to do cheap PvE, there's absolutely cheap PvE. If you want to play this game casually, you don't want to spend a lot of real life money, and you don't want to do very much PvE, then the answer is simple. You do the Abyss to make your money, and you do faction warfare to get your fights. You do that, and you'll make tons of money, and you'll get the most efficient amount of fights for your money. And it doesn't matter how casual or hardcore you are, because it scales up and down, that strategy.